30 years old.
David was telling me his second grader today. I was like, oh, thank God it's fun.
Second grade. Yeah.
Second grade, and we already started.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's I was like, that's gonna be another time boring. And I forgot, I'm like, what grade you are now? I'm like, you went to second, so, well, I'm in fourth. I'm like, okay. Then I look just super excited, like,
My
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 third,
kid is not a real, she's not a lover of school. Like she works hard, but she doesn't love it. And last year she decided, I don't like homework, and she kind of gazed off into the distance and said, there's just got to be more to life than this. There is eventually, but right now you're 8. This is your life. Yeah, she's third.
Third
Well, she's
grade.
just started 4th grade.
yeah,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's just like.
Well, not the baby. The,
Well, you saw-
the baby's 6. But I was hugely pregnant. Dina was there.
Well, just so I say, what I used to bring him when a year old, and 2 coming to the school board meeting, and now he's in 4th grade.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought he was just too younger when they start telling me, no, 4th, 3, 2nd, and I'm like, wow. I'm in
Time
shock.
marches on.
Reality check.
Yeah, that's for
I cannot
sure.
believe it. Next year is gonna go to. Cause it's like, ugh. I need to stop. One of them I had to stop because I'm
Yeah.
getting old.
No, you're fine. So jumping back into topic of conversation, we met earlier this week, and I was trying to just remember where we left off. I know you had a proposal. I wanted to share that, and I think we might have shared at the end, that we are prepared to provide a 3.25% increase, as well as a 0.85% board share of the healthcare. There's also the increase to $15 per hour. To make sure those employees who are not at 15 go to $15 an hour, which equates to about a 1.58% of that amount. So we're going to present that just in a written format, so you have it to look at. I'm going to try to see if I can just reach over the table.
No,
You can
I'm the
do-
wrong
you can
person
do
to.
it.
Oh, yeah,
try.
you're not
Yeah,
supposed
don't
to
do
do
it.
that. Yeah.
No, it's not that, but I'm not gonna make it. I'm not sure.
She didn't have the wingspan.
But we also want to be careful.
No, I'm doing okay so far. Let me just keep it clear now.
Okay, so probably imagine you have either a counter to that, or questions or discussions. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so
Yep.
just so you know.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
We didn't ignore your offer.
I'm so
your
sorry.
Request of $3.89 per hour. We did cost it out, and it was slightly higher than what you had guessed, Lindsay, or estimated.
Well,
Pretty
at that
close,
point, I
though.
was working on data that was.
You're
not-
pretty close. So it's the cost of it is approximately $14 million, which
Yes,
would
at
amount
11,
to,
yeah.
with fringe, would amount to just under a 28% increase, 27.95%. So it's a fairly significant increase that, of course, we don't have the resources to do at this point.
So, sorry about that. I
It's okay.
jumped the gun
No
on that.
problem,
I'm
no
sorry, I didn't have that in front of
I
me.
just wanted to make sure that they knew we were responsive to it.
That was 389. 389
So I
389 per hour.
Yep.
So, again, our flat rate proposal was based on the, what we had. We had costed out a number of different plans to get an idea of what would be do the most for the most people, while also, of course, staying in line with the statutory requirements that we have now for the first time on the support side. And I think, and the reason I want to frame it that way is because I think originally there was this idea that, not from here, but from Tallahassee, that yes, we want to value our support professionals. Yes, we want to make sure that they have a living wage. I'll come back to the living wage thing, but so we are going to fund that, when in reality, there was no special allocation. There was not anything close to significant funding to do anything to address compression. And while we did have, a decent chunk of our, I think we had something like 800, or right now we have maybe 850 or 875 employees that are currently under 15 in our unit. I believe so. You can correct me on that if I'm wrong. I might be citing the wrong sheet, but I believe that's where we're at. Somewhere around 875, 881. That doesn't do anything to address the incredible financial pressures that the other members of our, approximately 2,200 employee bargaining unit are facing. And one of the things that we've talked about here at the table was looking at, again, this idea of a living wage. The living wage, as we know, the living wage movement started several years ago, and has been gaining steam, to get up to $15 an hour. We obviously see that now in our specific geographical area, where we're looking at 11.3 or 11.2, according to the most recent CPI that came out this week, to say that 15 is a living wage in itself is outdated. It was outdated as soon as it was decided on, but in addition, not to have the funding come from the state, I think is important to state for the record, because we want people to understand the pressures that all of us are facing in trying to make this something that is meaningful to the employees that are scraping by, and in some cases not scraping by, to be able to show up to work here in Pinellas every day. The 389 flat amount was the amount that it was going to take our lowest paid employees to get to 15, and to extend that across the bargaining unit for not just equity, for recognizing the service of all of our veterans, but also to get closer to what it would amount to, the ability to live here and to keep working here. And I think when we look at a 3.25% increase, that we have a couple of concerns about that. First of all, it would, I think I'd have to look at it. I'm not sure if I have that up on my screen to cost that out, or what that would mean to the majority of our employees in this bargaining unit. But it's not going to come close to 11, closer to 11%, which is the reality that people are living with right now here in our area. But also, and I know that we had some of this conversation yesterday, our continued concern over the fact that there has been a plan in place for a number of years, and we understood that was, we saw evidence of it, of course, through most of the year last year, and about halfway through, we actually discussed it, that there had been a multi-year plan to increase by 3.25% every year, which.
Can I just jump in real quick on that one?
Yeah.
I know that Nancy said that last night, and while it's true, we wanted to increase our wages by each year by an amount. We never really settled on 3.25%. The nexus of that, and this happened prior to you being here, is the salary schedule that we made had 3.25% increments based upon the various levels. So we always wanted to keep everybody within a box on the salary schedule. So everybody had a salary schedule. So if you were an MBA at one school and another MBA in another school, both made basically the same amount of money. They could always look at that salary schedule and know what they wanted. And we negotiated that with the unions, in collaboration with the unions, both SEIU and PESPA. And so the 3.25% was built into the structure of that salary schedule. That's why if you look at the raise history, you'll see around 2020, it became, that's on this page. It became pretty consistent, 3.25% every year, because we were trying to make it so that if somebody was on a salary schedule at one level, they could just move up to the next level and get a 3.25% raise, so that salary structure remained relatively static. The intention, and perhaps I was not as clear as I could have been last night, the intention that we arrived upon 10 years ago was that we wanted to make sure that we continued to increase our teachers and employees' salaries over the years. And so if you look at the lower left-hand corner of that chart, you can see some years we were able to do more, and some years we were able to do less. For example, in 2013, which was right at the end of the recession, basically coming out of this recession, we could only do a 1.5% raise at that point in time. But as Dr. Grego was leading this district, he kept pressing upon me, we need to give the maximum raise that we can. So the next year we were able to give a 5% raise because of the funding that we received from Tallahassee, and so on. So if you look at that structure of raises over the course of the years, it really wasn't was never decided it's gonna always be 3.25% until only recently, because that was what was on the salary schedule. And our intent, in some years, we couldn't give the 3.25%, some years with 2.3, so we just adjusted the salary schedule to match that. Obviously, you know, in situations where we can afford to do more than that, we want to do more than that, that's our intention. 3.25% isn't any magic number, just to happen that that's what the number worked out to this year. In fact, we're a little bit shy of that 3.25%. We're about 18.4 million. 3.25 is about 21.1 million. But you know, our intention is to stretch and give the maximum raise that we can. So I just wanted to clarify that we never really agreed to a set percentage. We just agreed to the philosophy that we need to continue to increase our employees' salaries.
So yeah,
steadily.
I'd like to add to that, and there was a suggestion made, it's been made here before, and it was made last night, that we had a plan that the units were not a party to, that we had a plan for multi-year 3.25. And I want to correct that because that's not true. We didn't negotiate a plan without any bargaining unit. What we set was an aspirational goal of 3.25 as a minimum. And if we can reach that, we want to stretch to get 3.25. There's been years when we haven't been able to do that. If there are years when we can go above, we certainly want to do that, which is what we're doing right now. The numbers we gave you, which are realistic numbers, was an $18.4 million amount. Again, if you think there's money elsewhere, that's what we're talking about, okay? So we are stretching to get to a 3.25 based on 18.4. We're here to decide whether there are other things that we can come to increase that amount. We don't think so, based on what Mr. Smith went through, or Monday, I guess it was. So the suggestion that we're not negotiating in good faith is, we resent that.
And I can understand that. I mean, it's a strong statement, but it is also a statement that it's a statement that we made consistently last year. We've talked about it multiple times, and this is the first, this conversation is the first time that the team has ever said, no, we did not have this plan. The 3.25, and I get it that it's been different over the last few years, but the original statement, which was, I remember it very clearly because it was so surprising to me that there was a plan for 3.25% increases every year. And I don't remember whether it was 3 or 5, because I don't really know where we are in that plan. If truly there was not that plan, I think that would have been clarified over the course of however many times we've discussed this up until now.
Yeah.
I understand the spread. I also think we need to remember last year that there was virtually no movement on either side. I took the instructional, looking at the ARP funds as of January of last year, but there was no additional movement past the 3.25% increase
Can I correct that?
until, well.
Actually was, because we gave two additional days of planning.
Right, I'm
We also
sorry.
gave, we also gave. a
Yeah, that's what I
one-time
said
bonus
in
for the
January,
so
and
it
that was coming from ARP.
Yeah, so.
But in the PESPA unit, where we had started out with this 3.25% proposal as well, that was consistent with absolutely no movement until well into the second semester, like none. It was at the very end that we were able to, there was some movement towards our counter of flat rate increases. I think that if the plan was not already sort of set, giving the appearance of a refusal to negotiate, I feel like that would have been countered
so I don't-
very early.
Yeah, so.
So can I just
ahead.
address that real
Sure.
quickly?
No.
So again, hearkening back to the salary schedule that we developed collaboratively with SEIU and PASPA, that 3.25% structure. We try to adhere to that, even in years where we don't really have the money to do that, we try to stretch to get to that. And if you think about last year, the funding for 21-22, right off the bat, the FEFP was down by $18 million. So really, that was a year that getting 3.25% was a very difficult thing to do. We had to really stretch to do it. In fact, we then lost another $20 million during the course of the year as a result of Family Empowerment Scholarship. And even though we were offering the 3.25, I never came back as CFO and said, hold on a second, which I maybe should have. I really can't afford that 3.25% because we just lost 3.25%. I mean, we just lost $20 million in FEFP revenue. That happened in Pasco. That happened in several other counties, but I thought, you know what, we made the offer. That really wouldn't be good faith bargaining if I just said, you know, I can't, there's 20 million bucks, I have to pull back. So we really didn't have on the outset 3.25%. And then we really didn't have the 2.25% when the $20 million went away. But we wanted to continue to make that offer. We made spending adjustments. We're going to see probably a decline in fund balance this year as a result of that, because we spent money beyond what we got in funding. We got $18 million in funding, $18 million shortfall in funding last year as a reduction. And you know, that's the purpose of a reserve. That's why you have reserves, so you can endure those fluctuations in funding over the course of the year. And it gives you time to react to that, so you don't have to make massive cuts in the middle of the year. So I just want to point out that, you know, we started the offer of 3.25%, which was well beyond my zone of comfort, because we lost $18 million in funding from the outset. That's not really the position you want to be in and give a raise. But knowing that the environment we were in with the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, you know, Dr. Gregory pressed upon me and implored me that let's give that raise. So we did, and I knew it was going to have an impact on our funding that was anticipated. So I just want to point out that, you know, it wasn't. And then towards the end of the year, you know, we came up with a method by which to settle to give our PESPA unit those one-time bonuses, and we did that. So I just want to point out that, you know, we while you may have perceived it as no movement, we were well beyond my level of comfort at 3.25% at the outset.
Our goal is
Yeah,
just
that
to
was clear.
maximize raises based on available funds, period. And we don't lowball when we come in. And so if you perceive it as no movement, it's because we have done the financial analysis. And I say we, but Kevin's team has done the financial analysis. And we come out with what we hope is a good offer. And if there's more money, we would move up. If we don't have more money, we have no availability to move up. So you perceive it as we're not moving, we come in and slide to 3.25 and we're done. We reached to get to that 3.25.
Sure, and I understand that it's not as though we're just swimming in cash, but I do think that we have additionally consistently spoken of these funding sources as, you know, the pods, right? This 18 million, I'm sorry,
18.4.
18.4 for all the units, that's the pod. But it doesn't, and I know, again, it's sort of a weird situation to be in, to keep referring to something that happened at a different table, and, you know, even though it's all coming from the same general fund. We have to be, you know, Kevin, I hear what you're saying about what the reserve is for those times, those years that we have unanticipated expenditures. I think you can even reduce it to sort of a more simple analysis, which is that it's our rainy day fund. It's to take care of the contingencies. I don't think that any of us a year ago would have sat here and said, yeah, the cost of living is going to go up by over 11% here locally. That's going to outpace the national average by 2% points. 2 points. I would have thought it would have been absolutely out of the question to think about that at that time, even for me. And so, but it happened. And the reality is we're sitting here negotiating for our lowest paid, some of our lowest paid employees. And whether we say, yeah, we can afford it, yeah, we can't, or no, we can't, you know, we can't touch that funding source because we have to make sure that we don't run into a deficit later, so forth. We have, you know, this is something we discussed yesterday, but, you know, we have through attrition, we've been able to save this much, right? Through reducing units, we've been able to save this much. That's all been done without changing the responsibility, or in fact, just reducing the resources, but expanding the individual job responsibilities of these employees. They are stepping up to cover where we fall 50, 100, 200 employees plus short. To then say, not only are we going to reduce the budget by cutting units, putting more on each individual plate. But we are at the same time going to throw up our hands and say, there's just nothing more we can do when our people are living in their cars.
I just got several calls, the people living in a home, in the cars with the children, because the rent went up. And
Yeah,
they're still
And
working in the
I've got
district.
So many
Okay.
people that I. have
And it
friends
hits
that
our
are there.
district
it-
perhaps most of all, because it stands to reason that some of our lowest paid employees are going to be more, more likely to be renting. And I thank God to be a homeowner now, because it hasn't hit me as much as it does
Well, so
our
all of
people
them.
who rent. They literally cannot afford to stay in their homes. And if people can't afford to stay in their homes, they cannot afford to, they don't have a way to work.
So we understand that.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is where would the money come from? And when you say the unit cuts, the unit
It's because
are cut
student
because there's
enrollments.
less students. And if there's less students, there's less money. So if what you're saying is go to the reserve, are you talking go to ESSER and ARP and use that to fund salaries? We can't do that.
No, I
So
understand.
where are we gonna get the money?
I mean, let's be clear on can't versus perhaps should not. I get the argument of recurring, as much as I hate the reduction of our employees to recurring expenses. I understand the general wisdom of budgeting for your recurring expenses based on what you continue to expect to have. I do take issue, and I don't think that y'all probably disagree with me on treating our general fund as a recurring source of funding, because we have consistently had to deal with the slings and arrows from Tallahassee that have represented our funding as much greater than it actually is. I get that we're all in that same boat. I think it is all of our responsibility to be vocal and stand up to that. We do it a lot. We can't be the only ones who do it.
Our board does too.
Our board
We
does,
employ
yeah.
a lobbying firm that does exactly that as well.
I think that we've got some room for growth in that area, but I understand it. It's a difficult position it's a difficult position for everybody. But when we say ARP, ESSER, it's not so much that as looking for additional ways that those ARP and ESSER funds can be streamlined, potentially be used. Kind of like we did last year at the very end of the year when we were called upon almost immediately. I think, Kevin, you said it was by the end of the week to send funds, unused ARP and ESSER funds back to the state. And we can, I know we don't have to debate the constitutionality of that. It happened. So the district's strategy, I think, was a good one. Find ways to cover, expenses that can be covered by those funds so as not to lose them. But what that also does is free up the dollars from the general fund that would have otherwise been spent. And we know, we covered yesterday when we were discussing, if you look at the breakdown of the general fund balance, what is left over from the previous year that is not assigned, it's not a carryover, goes into the unassigned general fund. And that just last year, it's looking like we were at almost $8 million. Again, that wouldn't cover everything, but it is the kind of place we need to look. Where are we over budgeted? What have we assigned that just goes into the unassigned general
I
fund?
disagree with you. That unassigned dollar amount is $8 million. That represents about 1% of our contingency. Right?
Mhm.
$8 million is a half of a 2-week payroll period. A 2-week payroll is roughly $15 million every week actually, for a 2-week pay. So it's half of that. So if we were to use that, I mean, our contingent or unassigned reserves would be zero, which we don't want. Our contingency would be below what the board wants it to be.
I
below
get
the
that.
5%.
I get that. And I
mean,
think that
Lindsay, I just, I want to, I don't mean
Oh.
to minimize this and reserves. Yes, reserves can be used from time to time. We have used reserves from time to time. If you look back over the last several years, you'll see that our revenues over expenses have been negative in some years, like 2 years ago, it was negative $3 million, which means we used some of our reserve. Last year, if you took away the impact of the ESSER reserve that we created, which was, we did that because the state gave us a funding pot of money and they said, hey, use this money as fast as you can. So we said, you know what, let's just kind of like we did with the 14 million. We drew that money down, knowing we need it for the future. And that was really a 3-year funding source that we set that money aside for initiatives that we had to do using that grant funding source. But the concept of using a reserve is, that's the point of a fund balance, and to use a reserve for salaries is really not the best place to be, because what happens with that, and I've been there, it's happened in this district. We've had, a lowered fund balance, and at the same time you have lowered funding. And the result of that is reductions in employee force. Because you have to get rid of, if you think back to like 2007, 2008, 2009, we had massive cuts. We had massive cuts, and we tried to shield the classrooms as much as we possibly could, but it was near impossible, because it was 1 year during the recession, we lost $106 million of that. We had a contingency set aside from the American Rescue money of about $25 to $30 million that helped to offset that, but not completely. And that's the position that it's a precarious position to put yourself in. That if we said, okay, let's use, and I understand what you're saying, but if I said, let's use $10 million of the fund balance this year to fund raises. And next year, the question is, how do I pay for that? And then on top of that, next year, if I have a fund, remember, this is an election year. If next year I have a funding reduction,
Nowhere.
if I have a funding reduction next year, I've already started the year at $10 million low. I got to find $10 million in expenditure cuts the next year to continue to fund that $10 million raise that I took from one-time resources. Then I've got a funding reduction on top of that. I've got to find more. And remember what I said last night, 82% of our expenses are in salaries and benefits. The only way to save money is to cut people. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to avoid getting ourselves into a situation where we have to cut resources that we need. We have to cut your unit. We have to cut teachers' units, not because we have fewer students, but because we don't have the money to pay them.
I think that I understand what you're saying. I think when we start to talk about reductions in force, it's difficult to have those kind of discussions when we know that we are in a nationwide and very acutely statewide shortage of our teachers and
don't
staff.
disagree with you.
And so I think when we say reductions in force, of course, that's always it. And that is historically the justification that's put out there for remaining conservative. I understand it's always possible, but I don't think that it is as the reduction in force doesn't seem as realistic when we literally can't get people on the street to come in and take these positions to care for kids. But when we talk specifically about our ESPs, and I think in particular of some of them that are working with our most medically fragile children, and this is something that's close to, sure, this is close to my heart. We're in a situation right now where we have shortages in particular employee groups within the bargaining unit, and we have other employee groups that are being pulled to cover, to cover for that. That is. And I'm not saying that it's malicious, but I am saying that these shortages are being balanced through the labor of the people who are already here. We are about to, by statute, raise the starting salary, and that a rising tide raises all ships, right? At least some ships at this point. Many of our employees will be included in that raise, but we're still dealing with about 75% of them that won't. And when they are some of our longest term, most dedicated employees are not seeing an increase that is anywhere close to what someone, again, walking off the street, and we can't really get them in the door. And they've got the external pressure of not being able to live. I don't know how we expect them to continue to do this work. I honestly don't. And I think all of us that are on both sides of the table are looking at this looming crisis that, if the reserve is there for a hurricane, that's why it's, like you reserve so much for payroll, it's half a payroll cycle, right? It's in case a hurricane hits, it's coming. That we are seeing. I just don't understand if we cannot pay people an actual living wage for our local community to keep them coming to work. I don't know how we're going to keep them coming to work.
So I'm going to kind of piggyback on, or you go ahead.
Well, I just wanna
I'm
make
gonna-
one comment.
I'm gonna repeat
You're
what
right.
you said.
I
Yeah.
could pay them today. I can pay them this year using that reserve, but I can't pay them next year because I don't have the money. The money's now gone. And that's a situation I don't want to be in. And, and I completely stipulate to what you said. You're right about the difficulty in finding people. I have difficulty finding people in my shop.
Yep.
Yeah, everybody.
We're all on the same.
I don't know that it's an economic thing. I don't
We
know
do
that it's,
too.
yeah, it's, it's just, we can't find people. People aren't applying for jobs, and I don't know what happened to the
I don't know.
workforce. The workforce just disappeared during the pandemic. I'm not really sure where they went. Finance people are almost untouchable. You can't find them. So, but that's not unique to our organization.
No.
When you look at, when you drive through town, you see signs saying, you know, we'll hire you at Burger King, McDonald's, $15 an hour. They're not doing that because their revenues are so great. They're doing that because they're trying to drag people into the door. But they have the capacity to adjust their prices. I don't have that capacity, that they could raise the price of a hamburger. I can't raise the price of, I can't raise my FEFP contribution. The other thing is, you know, we had a constitutional amendment, which was passed a couple of years ago, which was requiring us to get to $15 an hour by 2026, September, I believe it is. We had a plan to get there.
Let's put it into overdrive.
It was put into
Correct.
overdrive, and
But
think about
also-
think about this concept. I know this is an economic concept, but it's kind of a cool one. We're right now, so what caused inflation? A lot of different factors cause inflation. Number one, supply shortage. When you have fewer supplies, prices go up. Number two, the massive infusion of cash from the federal government through the stimulus acts, through the era by ESSER and all. And it's just a fact of life. There's more money out there in circulation, prices go up. So talk about a perfect storm, the impact of what that $15 an hour is going to do in this area alone by forcing us to go to $15 an hour in this environment, it's going to cause further inflation. So the fact that we're going to bring people up to $15 an hour, you're right, it's going to erode people's buying power that are above that currently. Because there's going to be more money in circulation by those folks who are making less money. It's going to cause prices to go up. It's going to be an exacerbated problem. So it's a number we're going to continue to chase until we get this solved. And the solving of the problem isn't necessarily to use reserves from us. The solving of the problem is to have Tallahassee realize that we're in an inflationary environment and they have to fund us if they want public education to exist.
I'm glad you said the word exist, because that's where we're at. That's where we're at politically, economically. That is exactly where we're at.
Sadly, in this room, we can't solve that problem.
Well, that's true, but we can do a lot to solve. I think we can do more to solve the problems of the people that are here, that are not into, you're right, I am continually frustrated, maddened. In fact, by the hypocrisy of, that we see come out of, or that we receive from Tallahassee. And you're right, we can't solve those problems here, otherwise we would have done it a long time ago, but I do think we can do more. By, like you said, if we can't increase revenue, then the other way is to cut expenses. And I do think that we can find together creative ways of reducing expenses, reducing expenditures to keep our most valuable asset, which is our workforce.
So I don't want you to think that that's not an exercise that we go through every year. We look at
Oh,
expenditures.
I'm
on a
sure.
regular
I'm sure. I
basis.
mean, this is, I understand that,
No, but there are expenses over which we don't really have a great deal of control.
Sure.
There's, like, for example, energy costs. The price of fuel this year went through the roof. The price of, price of electric is directly related to the price of fuel. We're up about $5 million in energy expenditures this year over last year. So it's not like I could, just start shutting. I can, we do shut buildings off to save energy. But even despite that, even despite our energy conservation efforts that we have, we're still spending more on energy than we did last year. Look at your own electric bill. I mean, if you look at your electric bill this year over last year, it's probably $100 more than you paid last year, mainly as a result of the fuel costs. So those are inflationary pressures we have. Supplies, we have to buy, things for the classroom, we have to buy, textbooks and stuff. All of that stuff is up. It's all, so when you look at our total revenue, and I would love to invite you in to come and sit with me, just you and I, to go through the funding, just to talk about the different things. Because when you look at it, I'll never forget, I had an economics class many years ago, and the professor handed us the federal budget, and he said, what I want you to do is to take this federal budget home, just back in the early 80s, and I want you to go home and cut this budget. And when you try to do that, it's a matter of which program
Yes.
service do I want to get rid of. So when you look at what our budget is, when you think that of, let's use round numbers of $1 billion, 82% is in salaries, that's $820 million. So it sounds like this, it's only $200 million left, $280 million left. So which sounds like a lot of money. But then when you start looking at things like charter schools, which are $50 million, you look at things like our property and casualty insurance was $7 million. We look at our materials and supplies, which is typically about $25 million. And it's all required stuff. That's stuff we just buy because we want to buy. Is there room for cuts in that? Probably. You look at energy costs of like $25 million, transportation costs of 36 million, and we get 14. So when you go to try to cut, there's not a lot of places to go, because most of it, as I mentioned, is in salaries.
Yeah, and any organization of any significant size, it's particularly one that provides, that cares for children. You're gonna put the most money into your people,
that's
as
what
it
we do.
should be, because of all of those expenditures. The most critical is staff.
Hmm.
Because I don't, like you said, when we talk about, fast food restaurants and convenience stores and so forth, advertising on the street for people to come in, 15, 16, $17 an hour. Literally, what is keeping our people here doing this work versus
Well-
going to someplace where they're not necessarily putting their mental, their physical health on the line to care for kids that need them the most.
And it's noble that they do that, and you're right, but it also, let's not also forget about the benefits that we have as a district. The work hours that we have are significantly different than what somebody would be working in.
And that's, and part of that, and all the salary go just to, most of all, they're working for health insurance, and you think with the increase that we're looking into it, you think they're gonna be able to afford it just with 3.25 to pay the health insurance?
So if you
It,
look,
we
if you-
just have to do better.
if you look at our health insurance, what we, I don't know, I don't think you were at EWBS the last time, but we looked at the health insurance and the plan on which the majority of people are, which is the basic select plan. The payroll per period increase would be $4, which is roughly $80 a year. It's not a lot of money. Over the years, if you remember,
You don't see as a lot of money.
well,
For my bargaining units, it's a lot of money
So-
for the salaries they're making.
but we
So-
as a bargaining unit and as a district have made choices over the years. And one of those choices was to have a well-funded health insurance plan, which provides a really good benefit. Several years ago, I kept imploring the board, we need to put more into salary because that has a better longer-term impact on our employees. It affects the FRS, the retirement system. It affects the social security long-term. So the board in a philosophical change several years ago said, yeah, let's put as much as we can into salaries, and we've been doing that. And that's always been our philosophy, to put as much as possible into salaries, which is why last year we picked up $9 million in health insurance costs, which was a total increase of the health insurance that the employees absorbed at zero cost. They absorbed zero plan design changes, and board picked up that entire thing. This year, it's a $6.5 or $6.8 million increase, but proposing we pick up the majority of that, 75% of it, $5.5 million.
Well, right, that was a significant benefit for employees, but we also extending that conversation, we also know that of that 9 million, 4 million was reimbursed through our ESSER. That money goes somewhere, and I understand that it's used to meet other deficits in other areas. I get all that.
It goes to pay for the $9 million. Otherwise, we would have had to put it onto the employees.
Right, but if the board so we say the board adopted 9 million and then 4 million came back. So what we
Well,
said was, and that was all, it was included in all the salary proposals, but really what the board did was 5 million because they got that money back. So again,
No,
that's taking 4 million away.
No, they did $9 million because absent that money from ESSER and ARP, we would have had no choice but to change our plan design or increase contributions by employees, because we didn't have the additional money.
But, okay, then help me understand then, because for my understanding was that the board said, okay, we got this 9 million and we want to cover this 9, and it wasn't the salaries, it was included though, it was noted in the salary agreements and so forth. The board adopted absorbed $9 million in order to, of increasing healthcare costs in order to refrain from passing that on to employees. However, and I think we said in AWBS April, maybe, was it April? That 4 million came back from, so there were 4 million of that 9 million came back.
So the 9 million was this current year's amount of money that we had to increase our health insurance. The way we were able to do that is because we got some reimbursements for claims in the prior year, which made the prior year's increase in expenditures less than what it would have been. So we had the availability of funds as a result of 4 million, you're right. But if we hadn't had that money, we would have had a much longer debate over what to do with health insurance, because the board wouldn't have had the full $9 million to spend.
But we did have that 4 million that came back. I mean, had we not,
And so that
but we
$4 million
did.
went to our health insurance plan. It wasn't like we got $4 million, we have a pot of money of $4 million. It went to pay for our health insurance.
but it also came through after we had settled both the PCTA and PESTA salary agreements. And so if the board had committed to that funding and then we received 4 million back, I'm not saying that particular, I've often said, it doesn't have to be this pile. But if that 4 million came back to the district, either it goes to a particular categorical or
No,
it offsets what you would otherwise be spending because those
And it-
dollars were
and it-
previously tied
and it
up.
did.
And I
did.
know that 4 million is not I know it sounds like a ton,
It offset the increasing cost of the health insurance in this current year.
but when we
In the
offset
current year.
anything,
That's what's important.
Yeah, in this current fiscal year, in the 21-22 fiscal year, that's how the board absorbed the $9 million.
so even, okay, so what you're saying, I'm not telling you, I'm asking. What, so when we put into our salary agreements, we listed last year, the salary agreement, the board has absorbed this cost, for health insurance, but we got that reimbursed and it was put towards this year's healthcare costs. It's not that they absorbed that cost. It should not have been included then in the depiction of the salary increase. Instead, it was pushing a cost forward.
It is. So what happens is if I got reimbursed from a one-time source of funding for $4 million, that my health insurance is not going down. It's going up. In fact, it's going up by $6.8 million this year, right? So had we not had that $4 million, we'd be going up by $10.8 million this year because of the impact of a non-recurring source of funding. The other thing that we have to bear in mind is that our health insurance, the 11208 requirement by the state is not fully funded. And so what happens, we have about $13 million in our 11208, which is the statutory requirement.
I understand that we're about half.
So we're about $13 million. And so when the actuaries came to us this year and said, you guys are a little bit shy in your reserve that you have, what do you want to do about that? And I said, you know what? We really can't afford to put any additional money out to employees, and the district can't really afford it. So let's leave it the way it is and we'll catch up. So when I do that, I have to sign a letter to the state actuary as a CFO saying that I assure them that we have adequate reserves within our general fund operating budget in the event that a significant amount of claims come in. And so that's another reason why I have to maintain a reasonable balance in the general fund balance, because it is linked directly to our self-insured health insurance fund. We should be at about $23 to $24 million in that reserve. We're not. We're 13. We were 2 years ago, we were at $21 million. But then that year we had a $10 million loss in the fund, which was what caused which was mainly from COVID and from significant claims. And then when the $4 million came in, that helped to offset the dollars going forward, which helped us to pick up the $9 million because it made our increase a little bit less than what it would have been. Our increase would have been probably about $13 million because of that $10 million loss that we had 2 years ago. Actually, it was that last year. It was last year, actually. 2 years ago, we were actually at the 112. We had about $22 million. So we lost $10 million. We went down to $13 million. So
Along those lines, when we talk about when we took a loss, right? We were fully funded we were maintaining the special reserve. I'm just talking about as an example. We maintained the funding for our special reserve for self-insurance. Then we had to take a loss. We took a $10 million loss. And I understand the guarantee process that we have to put behind it in order to reduce the increases to employees. We've also talked about the way that our state allocation has come down and included a mischaracterized amount that is essentially a pass-through for the family empowerment scholarship. And you've mentioned that we had a $20 million increase to that last year, mid-year, right? Was it third calculation.
thank you for paying attention.
I pay pretty good attention. So I understand that was an unexpected expense for last year.
Wasn't expensive, it was revenue decline.
It was a revenue decline, but because we have based our budget on the revenue that we were anticipating, and either that revenue decreased by 20 million or we got basically a bill, right? It's an encumbrance to a certain extent. I see this, okay, because we may sustain this hit, we have to cut back on, we have to be conservative on salaries. We've got to cut this. What happens, I'm honestly asking, if we just say to the state, sorry, we don't have that in our budget to pay that $20 million.
They never give it to us. It's included in our FAFP calculation, but we never see the money. What happens is they'll tell me in the first calculation, just these round numbers, you're going to get an increase of $35 million in funding. Then the second calculation comes along, and that's what we use for the public hearing. And then we have the October count of students, and then the third count comes along, the third count, where they make adjustments for increases and decreases of students. And you never get funded for increases in students, you only get funded for decreases in students.
Mm.
At that point, in that calculation is when they
That's
say, oh, by the way, of that $35 million increase we gave to you last year, we're gonna take $20 million and never give it to you. Because it's.
So we really are just getting 15, and it's because of the delay, the funding cycle.
That's exactly right,
Gotcha.
which is the reason for that $10.5 million that I put on that analysis that I did, because
Mm-hmm.
that's going to happen again this year. And last year, every district in the state was broadsided by it. Nobody expected that to increase. We had an estimate of an increase, never thinking it was gonna double. I mean,
Mhm.
that's insane that it actually doubled.
But I know
So
we budgeted for that this year, right? Haven't we said that we're anticipating that, but
That's-
but you think it could double again?
that's the 10.5 million. That's certainly possible. We've doubled every year since they put the family empowerment scholarships into the FEFP, which is why my comment last night, if you guys do have a legislative platform of any sort, and we're gonna do the same thing to try to lobby to get that out of the FEFP, because it's misleading. I mean, it shows me, and it really makes it difficult to budget, because
Well, we
they
have to
show me
lobby
the
to get
funding.
it out of the funding,
Yeah,
not
well, yeah,
just, not just
they show me a
representing.
funding amount that I'm gonna get, like that $39 million that I showed last night on increased funding we're going to get. If I ignored the fact that family empowerment scholarships were a reality, and I didn't put that $10.5 million adjustment in there, come February, if they send me another $20 million bill, I'm looking for another $20 million, and that's a hard thing to sustain. So when you look at, and if you,
It's not a bill,
well, it's a reduction in revenue, so really it's less
Okay,
resources
it's a
available.
cut.
So if I create a budget today, like the budget that we're talking about today, going forward to provide a 3.25% raise is based upon that analysis that I did. Let's assume I did that, and I give a 3.25% raise, which costs roughly $21 to $22 million. And let's say that in February, I get another reduction in revenue, another $20 million. I'm kind of $40 million in a hole at that point, because I've increased my expenditures by $20 million and I've decreased my revenue by $20 million. Basically a net shift of 40. So that's the point of a reserve, is when if you have a reserve, you have time to react to that. So if you choose to meet with me, and I hope you do, I will show you a graph of historical contingencies over the last probably 20 years. And when you look, and what I like to do is I like to do a break-even analysis. I show the trend of fund balance increases and decreases over the course of time. And what happens typically is you have a fund balance that you accumulate, and you have it, so if you have a break-even line, you're above the break-even line. Let's say we're 20 million above the break-even line, that increases fund balance. And then a year might come along where we're $20 million below the break-even line, that decreases fund balance. And you'll see that it's a consistent flow over time. It's never a constant gradual increase in fund balance. It's basically an up and down over the course of time. And you'll see the last couple of years, we've been below the line. A couple of years before that, we were above that. Last year, we were above the line because of the ESSER reserve, but prior to that, we were below the line. A couple of years, we were above the line. So the healthy place to be is spend half your time above the line and half your time below the line by equal amounts. And that way you maintain a steady level fund
Sure.
balance, and you don't get yourself into a situation where my fund balance is so low that I lose $20 million in funding, and I don't have anywhere to get it. I can't pull money. I can't pull money from special revenue funds. That's limited by what I can do. My capital outlay fund can't be used for salaries and benefits. I do identify and transfer certain things to reimburse back to the operating fund, but those are pretty much exhausted. So if I have a reduction of $20 million in revenue during the course of a year, if I don't have adequate reserves to offset that, at least temporarily, and then build that reserve back up again, I'm in a really bad financial position.
so, and understandably, it's not a position that anybody wants to be in, but I guess my question is, when does a staffing shortage or an inability to keep the employees here, when does that turn into an unexpected, when does that turn into the same kind of unexpected hit to our budget that the funding reduction that we might see in the third calc, like, when does our inability to keep adults caring for kids, when does that turn into the same kind of emergency that we look to the reserve to pad?
So,
At
and,
what
you know,
point what's the tipping point on that?
so,
Because I
well,
think our people would feel as though they're there.
That's a question I can't answer. And the reason I can't answer is because, again, you're talking about solving a long-term problem with short-term resources. And if you do that, that's, it's great to do this year, and next year seems like a long way away, but it's not. So if I took $15 million of the reserve this year and said, I'm gonna pay for salaries for that, that's okay. But then when next year comes along, I've got to find $15 million to cut.
right, to keep.
in order to
people.
cover that,
Mhm.
Yeah.
just to cover what I spent this year, because I'm gonna have that same expense next year.
Mhm.
So if I don't make reductions or expenditure reductions between now and then, I've got an immediate $15 million hole that I start off the year with.
Right, and I think that's what we're talking about is
That's-
reductions in where we can find places. I also think it's important to communicate to the board. I get their adopted their policy of a 5% reserve that is what, 80%? I think it's 80% over the state required minimum. I get the policy. But again, you can't
But
you can't pad your piggy bank and starve your kids. Like you have to take care of your people before you can look towards what you feel
Mhm.
comfortable with. These people are not living comfortably. I think that if we talk about, we've been encouraged to incorporate this into our lobbying platform. This is a discussion that probably needs to be had with your administration and your school board,
we
that
have.
they may have to step outside of that comfort zone to keep this district going.
Lindsay, we can't, unfortunately, I wish I could, but I
Mhm.
can't solve the current inflation problem right now. By any means. There's nothing I could do about it. I can't
Mhm.
cover the cost of 11.3% inflation for employees. I wish I could. But just for the PCTA unit alone, that's $65 million. And it's a $65 million recurring cost. So forget the $15 million example I just used a moment ago. Let's use the $65 million example. So if I pay $65 million, even if I had it out of reserves, I pay that this year out of reserves. I've got a $65 million hole to solve next year. What do I do? How do I solve that? The only way to solve that is by expenditure reductions. Where's the highest amount of expenditures in my budget? Salaries and benefits. The
Right.
only thing that I could do is to reduce salaries, reduce employees, or reduce benefits.
I think the issue I have with it is when we characterize it as the only thing that can be done. I understand that it
What
is-
else can be done? Tell me what else can be done.
I mean, like we suggested, looking at the budget and seeing where we have historically over budgeted, where we have been able to save.
I-
at the
So
end
I
of the
think
invite
year.
you-
that's
I
what you're
invite you
gonna,
to
I
come
think
and
you
point
need to
to
go
that.
sit
Let's
and
go
have a
We don't-
conversation, because you
Yeah.
keep saying that, but we ask you, we've done that.
I mean,
Kevin's
I will say
team
that
has done this, like,
I-
that we have that is what his job and his department is responsible for. So
And it's my
what
job
we
to
have
analyze it to a
It-
certain
it
of
is.
extent.
course, so that's why
But
I think you really do need to have some one-on-one with
Yeah,
Kevin,
because,
because
the
to go
board,
through all of that.
the board has
So-
hired me as the superintendent has hired me as their subject matter. I mean, I'm the one who makes recommendations and I make determinations as to what, along with my team, of course, what we can afford to do. When you say that we over budgeted, there's two different concepts or two different factors within any organization that uses a budget. You have budgeted balances and then you have actual balances, and budgeted always become actual at the end of the year. So a budget is a plan of how we're going to
Right.
spend money. And I might think let's just use small numbers. I think I'm gonna spend $5 million in substitute teachers this year, and I might actually only spend $4 million. So that might provide a little bit of a surplus. So what happens is when you have those surplus, remember I talked about that graph a little while ago, the ups and downs of the graphs. You have fluctuations in that. You're gonna have years where you show an excess of revenues over expenditure. Or if you think about it in business terms, it gives you show a profit, years you show a loss. It's okay to show a profit. It's okay to show a loss. It's not okay to show a consistent loss though. And in terms of a public education entity, it's not a good idea to show a constant profit either. Because that
Right.
says I'm taking money that belongs to be spent in the classroom and I'm not
Absolutely.
spending it. So when I show you that graph, you're gonna see that we have spent the last 20 years above and below that break even line. Because it's not an intent of this district, it's not an intent of me as CFO to build a stockpile of money. It is,
No.
however, an intent of this CFO to maintain a balance of money that is adequate in the event of fluctuations in funding, to prevent me from having to make drastic cuts during the course of the year.
And I appreciate that. And I know that I understand that it's not the intention of the district or you as CFO to purposely. And I think that was an understanding that I may have miscommunicated yesterday and given you the impression that I was somehow questioning your integrity on that. And I was not. I've looked at the numbers. They are reflected. The numbers that I have are reflected from district documents, are very much reflective of what we see in the state version of that. I understand that all of these numbers are the same. It's a very transparent process. You just got to know how to navigate it. And I am the subject matter expert that these guys have hired.
Mhm.
So and I'm certainly not putting myself in your shoes as CFO, but I do, as you say, pay attention. I will be in a better position to analyze this further after we go through the normal time of finalizing the AFR So I can do some plug and play with that, and I would absolutely like to sit down with
Yeah,
you. I just look at trends over the last few years, and there are places, I'm not saying that there are places of monumental over budgeting or monumental underspending, but there are places where there are amounts that
So-
either comprise or total millions of dollars
So I talked about the concept
that
of
can
lapse last
come
night.
into the unassigned reserve.
I talked about the concept of lapse last night. And lapse is that concept, when you have a budget, again, it's a plan. And to your point, a lot of times you can't fill all your positions, so you wind up with some level of lapse. That lapse, which is unspent dollar, right, that we're budgeted for. That lapse enables you to give future raises, and that's exactly what we do with it. When we have an excess of funding at the end of the year, that enables us to give more raises in the coming year if we can. And so it's not that we just stockpile that money away. And really, again, I hate to be a broken record, but if you look at my fund balance trend, you're gonna see it hasn't, when I say my fund balance, I wish it was my fund balance, the district's fund balance trend. It hasn't been rising. It's been remaining relatively steady. We have a philosophical difference that you think 3% is adequate. I say 5 is inadequate. Because of the fluctuations that you can incur, especially, when you look at the family empowerment scholarship going up by 20 million bucks this year. That's a funding source that's gonna ding your reserves. You have no choice but to do that. And so if you don't have those adequate reserves, you're gonna find yourself in a situation where you're getting a letter from the state saying that you've gone below 3%, you're in a financially precarious position. And then the next step is you get down below 2% and suddenly you're in a financial emergency. And I've seen districts in that position. I don't want to be in that position. Friends across the bay, I feel bad for them. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Manatee County was in that experience, that situation at one time, may still be. It's not really just unpleasant for the district. It's unpleasant for the employees as well. That's not a place you want to be. So, I don't want to belabor this conversation, but if you want to come in and talk with me, I welcome you. We should probably have final numbers on the FR won't be done. We'll have final numbers of what our results of operations were probably by mid to late week next week. If you want to meet sometime during the coming week, I'd be happy to meet with you. We can chat about this. I'd love to show you that graph, just so you can see.
Yeah,
see what
absolutely, absolutely. And
what
you've
the trend
done,
has
you've
been.
done a lot to illustrate that here. And I think, and listen, I understand, having been across the bay and across it every day,
Mhm.
I do understand the situation that they're working with. I also understand some of the political factors that have gone into magnifying that situation, publicly. I don't take the stance that below 3% or 3% is adequate or makes anybody feel comfortable in the reserve. I also, though, take the stance that a shortage of hundreds, if not thousands of employees, that's not comfortable either. That's not satisfactory either.
So I
That's
don't
not
know how much of
enough
that is a
either.
factor of pay and how much is a factor of people just aren't applying for jobs.
Mhm.
People have disappeared in the workforce. And I can't answer that question. I'm just saying that as a matter of course. So, you have asked for, we're saying we'll give you we'd like to offer you a 3.25% raise, and when Paula factors in the rest of the information that we gave you on the sheet, the 1.58%. For $15 an hour, the 0.85% for health insurance, an effective increase in compensation of 5.68%. You're asking for 27.95%. We're worlds apart.
Yeah.
I'd like to see perhaps a counter.
We will look at the information. I'm very much looking forward to, thank you for giving me a time frame on that. That helps. I know this is not normal. It's not like the information is delayed. This is part of the normal process.
It
I
is.
get
It
that.
is.
So it's just that I do think that before we have that information, it's difficult to say to be able to
Mhm.
talk meaningfully about what the line items look like. I get that it's a big gulf, but I feel lucky to be sitting in the seat that I'm in, having these conversations and not being the one that is, having conversations about how I'm gonna feed my kids and where they're gonna live.
I don't disagree with you on that, but again, unfortunately, we don't have the latitude to solve that problem.
Right.
That's a big inflation number, and yeah, it's affecting everybody. It affects you, me, it affects everybody, and some more than others, sadly. But I wish that I could wave a magic wand and give everybody a 15% raise, but I don't have the resources to do it.
All right, well, we'll take the information and look at the numbers. Like I said, I anticipate more information, so that's good.
Sure.
And can look at ways to still try to get something meaningful for people out of this. Do we want to go ahead and set dates? I don't know. I don't,
Well, I
I
think
thought
I'm
that Hesper
hearing-
already had.
We did not know because we did these two, but if you were waiting.
No, I was gonna say, it might be more productive because, we both. We've been around a little bit. We understand the concerns with inflation. What we've said is we will maximize raises based on available funds. I think it would be productive to allow the books to close and you to sit with Kevin and kind of ask the questions and have that conversation and then meet again.
I mean, because that's what I was just gonna say is that you had said that you wanted to, we're kind of in this,
And that's about a week and a half or so.
So I
Next
just want to point out, full transparency, that the AFR won't be done until early September. I don't think we'll wait that long, but I
No.
could give you numbers and show you where we are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It doesn't have to be the
Yeah,
AFR or the cap. I don't need any of that.
Yeah, it won't be in the form of
I don't
that, but
need any
we
of
could
that.
certainly have a conversation as to where we land at year end. And
It would help to have basically the expenditures that line up with the DSB. Like I've got all that. It's
yeah,
just if I
we
can see the
I could
expenditures.
show
then-
you like expenditures by.
Yeah, I don't
function,
necessarily need
major
the
objects, something like that, yeah.
presentation.
That should all be done by next week, but the AFR is a process and it takes a bit
Takes
of
some
time to
time.
do.
Yeah, and we also, I think I don't know that we acknowledged it during this session, but we're also working with some urgency because of the statutory deadline on these,
Yeah,
this
well, yeah.
minimum increase.
$15 an hour has got to be in place by October 1st, according to what the statute
Mm-hmm. So I
says.
think we have to be very, I think we all agree that we have to be very purposeful in moving.
We,
moving
do.
on.
And, really,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's a statutory requirement, it's gonna cost us $7.5 million or so, but it's also something that we're required to do, but we want to do.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Of course, I don't think that anybody here is arguing with the need for what has been done. It's just wouldn't have been nice if the state had funded it. And it would be nice if it was actually reflective of an actual living wage.
so what, do you want to set up a time to meet with Kevin first? Do you want to set another time? Whatever you want to do. We can do.
Could we look at some of those numbers next week?
Sure.
Is
Why
that-
don't
does that work?
Yeah, why don't you send me an email,
Okay,
either today or Monday, and I'll respond to you within a day or so to tell you when the best day is. 'Cause
Thank
I
you.
just want to find out where that is.
that'll give me the opportunity to just for the data, you
Yeah,
know?
and I would love to go over, some of the philosophies we've had as a district as it relates to expenditures with you, just to show you some of the numbers relating to fund balance, and you'll see the fund balance really hasn't been growing. I'd like to talk about that. So, we could set aside an hour and a half or so. I think that would be.
And then, so do we want to plan for another bargaining session for the following week? I think at that point, we're getting into the 20, that's gonna,
I think I'm gonna throw it back to you that if you think, it's kind of in your court of when you think you'll have a counter for us.
I'd like
If
to
you would
err on
like.
the side of scheduling and then. Because I know everybody's schedules fill up quickly. The thought of the week of the 22nd, I think, oh, I got plenty of availability and
Yeah, no,
I
I
truly
don't
don't.
really.
What is that on 22nd, 23rd? It says
22nd, we have,
23rd, no, that's
PCTA.
pretty much 3 days I can't.
We have a meeting on the
22,
23rd.
23, 24, it's gonna be a
20.
crazy day.
how about the
20th.
25th?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine, but
Is
the
that a morning
24th,
meeting?
that's
It's a
after
morning.
the citizen
Yeah,
clinic,
too much.
but yeah, too
What is
much.
it? What do you want?
Either, could we set it for either Thursday, the 25th or Friday, the 26th? Friday, the 26th would actually be better for us if it worked for y'all.
I'm out.
You're out.
I'm at an
25th and afternoon.
attorney
I don't have
conference.
my calendar.
Are you here on the
Yeah.
25th?
Hmm?
Just
It's
Friday?
Thursday?
Yeah.
I'm here in the morning. And then I. it's in two
That's
pages.
what I have to do.
Can you do the morning on the 25th?
Do morning or 25th.
Then we do afternoon,
Oh,
No,
afternoon, I'm
she's
sorry.
leaving.
I
She
can
has,
do,
the
what
25th
you're saying.
afternoon.
before 2.
so 1 o'clock to 2? She has to leave at 2.
Could we do the same time slot on that day, or could you do one on the 25th?
No,
Or is it,
no.
you're tied up?
What do you want to do? The 25th? What works for you, Nelly? What time?
I was looking at 4 o'clock.
No, she'll be gone by then.
How about the 24th, which is a
No.
Wednesday?
That's a
24th, we
citizen
have an all
clinic.
day, we have an event that day that is gonna be all hands on deck. Well,
Uh-huh.
Everybody else could do the 24th. right?
We
I mean, the
cannot- I
25th.
cannot do the
25th,
24th.
25th, I mean.
But what time on the 25th?
1 o'clock.
Can you do 1 o'clock on the
No,
25th?
that's what I said, 4
Oh, you can
o'clock.
do it.
Oh,
I can only do 45 minutes, like on that day.
about
Friday?
What about Friday?
Or
Yeah,
Monday or
that's fine.
Tuesday. I can't.
Friday the
I'm up.
26th, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay,
with
Friday
out
the
anyway.
26th work. I'm sorry, I know Lori, that doesn't work for your schedule, but it works okay for us if it works okay for everybody else. It's Friday the 26th,
That's fine.
or we could,
Why don't we set that one tentatively?
Okay.
I have to look at my
Oh,
calendar.
he doesn't have his calendar here, so,
okay,
that.
all right.
Okay,
we'll get
just
it-
let us know.
Okay,
and if not, maybe
just
that
gonna-
29th or whatever that Monday.
right, exactly. I'm
Let's
putting
just
that on.
tentatively put 1 o'clock on the 26th.
Yeah.
I'll just do a hold until I hear from Kevin.
Okay,
And
I'm
then,
putting it tentative.
You send it to me,
Mhm.
as you will put in the calendar. Or the 29th, I will be fine too.
Okay.
The 29th work for you?
29? Yeah.
We can
Do we want to just do the 29th?
29th, is she wanna
You
be
tell
there,
me.
yeah.
Okay,
29th,
that.
fine, you got
That's
the
Monday, the
29th?
I think the
29th?
29th is okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can we set it tentative? Because I just want to make sure that I'm lining up the two calendars between the two units. Sometimes that's a little challenging, but I think the 29th is okay.
okay, so here's what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna put hold on both of my days on my calendar, but Lindsay, you get with me and let me know if the 29th
Okay,
seems to work better. 1 o'clock.
4 o'clock,
Oh, 4 o'clock.
on the
Yeah.
29th.
Can we do 3:30?
yes.
Sure, yeah.
I don't
yeah.
work the long hours.
I'll see if.
Ooh.
see if-
Oh, you don't wanna work all long hours?
Well, I don't wanna have to. I choose
I
to.
mean either.
3:30,
Well,
3:30.
Saturdays and Sundays.
okay. 3:30 to 5?
No, 4:30. If we wanna meet at 3, I can do meet at 3, but I'm not gonna schedule anything beyond 4:30. I can't. I have something else that night at
Okay,
5.
so 3, is
We're
that
gonna
okay?
get
Three
started.
work okay? 3, okay, 3 to 4:30 then. And thank you for going a little bit, going a little earlier on that, so we could have a longer session. Hopefully that'll. And so I'll check, but tentatively I'm putting that down.
Okay. And then you just let me know.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You said the word y'all. Did you write them down?
I'm from Birmingham.
Birmingham.
That's right. Roll Tide, right? You said last night.
No time, yeah.
We say use where I come from.
You say what?
We say use where I come from.